now streaming live on Facebook. Fantastic. We'll just give a second for the feed to catch up. Okay, excellent. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jen Baldwin. I'm the Data Acquisition Manager for North America for Findmypast, and you are joining us for Let's Discuss. Today we're talking about religious records from New York to the UK, and we're excited to have with us our special guest, Joshua Taylor from the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. So Josh, welcome.
Thank you, Jen. I'm happy to be here.
That's good. I know I had to twist your arm a little bit to get you here, but I'm not afraid to do it.
No. I mean, it's you're never busier than when you're home all day, right? Working on things.
That's right. For those who don't know Josh, Josh is the president of the NYGNB, and we're going to refer to it by its acronym for the duration of the hour because saying New York Genealogical and Biographical Society takes too long. So Josh is the president, has been with the organization for 3 years now. Almost four. I'm going to read his bio so everybody knows who he is and that he actually really does know what he's talking about, because he does. Josh is a nationally known and recognized speaker and author on genealogy and family history. Passionate about the diverse and dynamic field of genealogy. He is the president of the NYGNB. Joshua is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including Roots Tech's Distinguished Presenter Award, the Federation of Genealogical Societies Award of Merit, the Reuben Kam Youth Award from the National Genealogical Society, and in 2017, Joshua was named as one of Library Journal's movers and shakers. How did that feel to be a Library Journal mover and shaker?
Kind of cool in a way. For the 8-year-old me that wanted to be a librarian, right? It was kind of cool. But it's also, I was reading those who were also named mover and shakers that year, and it's impressive. I mean, librarianship is such a diverse field, and people don't realize the tenacity one needs to catalog a book, let alone answer a research question or decide what's circulating, what's not. I mean, it's just an incredible field. So
absolutely.
I'm honored to be named amongst others who are moving and shaking in the industry.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Good. So you may know Josh from his work on television, featured genealogist on Who Do You Think You Are? And I love this part of your bio, Josh. Can be seen taking America through their past as a host on the popular PBS series Genealogy Roadshow. So that's Josh in a nutshell. For all of you out there watching, remember that this is a very dynamic event. We would love to have you comment and question as we go through the live stream. If you don't ask enough questions, we'll just stop the live stream.
But we can talk about this topic forever and ever, Jen.
We really could, actually. So please feel free to comment, say hello, let us know what you're working on, let us know your stories. We'd love to hear from you, no matter where you are in the world. Rose is with us from Pennsylvania. Hi, Rose. Thanks for joining with us today. Excited to have you. We have a whole series every week on Findmypast on our Facebook page devoted to just talking to the community and helping with research, helping with various dynamics of the world of genealogy, whether it's from the UK or the US. So if you haven't yet already, take a look at our weekly schedule. It's posted on the it's posted on the Facebook page. William says, Jen, we know you'd never stop the live stream, William. You're right. You're totally right. So we've got Kim from Leeds, England. We've got Lori from Philadelphia. Ellen from Roscoe, Illinois. Mandy is also from Lincolnshire. That's fantastic. Patricia's with us. So all, thank you very much for saying hello and being with us today. Okay, so we are talking about religious records, and we're specifically going to talk about the state of New York and why that's so dang hard and how to use those records.
Not hard. An opportunity.
Okay,
it is an opportunity.
No. I've tried to use that line on other people and I'm not going to buy it today. I have a Methodist minister from Welsh somewhere in New York.
All right.
Anyway, we're going to talk about how to use those records to kind of transition back into the British Isles. We're going to talk about what makes U.S. religious records different from the UK, which we hit on a little bit last week. So certainly, if you haven't seen that, take a look at that video as well. We've got a couple of questions that have been asked in advance, so we'll get to those, but we also have some resources we want to share. Josh, can you start? Just tell us a little bit, give us your elevator pitch on the GNB. What is the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society?
Right. So the NYGNB is a 150-year-old organization that has essentially been preserving New York records since 1869. We have a variety of educational activities, online records, and publications, different things that we do that try and showcase New York records, and we try and help people find the records and then also understand what the records mean when it comes to researching in New York. So we cover both New York City as well as the entire state of New York. So it's a big remit as far as that goes, with the types and the time periods and everyone that we work with. It's quite diverse, and 300-400 years worth of New York stories.
One of the actually, and you finished that sentence perfectly. One of the things I love about the GNB is the focus on the story, and the impact that the state of New York alone had on the history of the United States, but also the history of just kind of the greater Western hemisphere of the world, right? It's an incredible place to research. And as much as it is challenging for me, being in Colorado, and as much as I like to tease Josh about that, it is a fascinating place to research. So what kind of resources does the GNB have for members specifically, because you are a membership organization?
We are. So for members, access on our website, newyorkfamilyhistory.org. There's a new online records platform where we publish sort of sets of records that we gather from time to time. We also, since 1870, have published a peer-reviewed quarterly for genealogical research in New York called the New York Genealogical and Biographical Record, or the Record, or the Yellow Book. The record includes abstracts of materials as well as articles of compiled families and those that sort of solve brick walls. And so not only do members have access to the full archive of the record, which is more than 1 million names of everything in the record has a citation in that sense. So it's different than an online tree in that sort of respect. But it also is a teaching tool. Record articles will teach you how to locate church records in a specific place. It'll teach you, how do I use these complicated land records and tax records to try and identify a parent or a maiden name. And so a lot of folks read the record to find their family, but they also read it to learn the strategies for the place and the record types that they use in New York.
Yeah,
so that's some of the resources available.
I like that you called it the Yellow Book. I know when mine comes in the mail, and I was looking to see if they were close enough for me to grab, but they're not. When mine comes in the mail, my 11-year-old stops and she's, oh, we got to leave mom alone for a couple hours. She got the yellow one. Like, okay. I've trained her well. All right. So we've got a couple of other people commenting. Janet from Bellevue, Washington. Welcome back, Janet. It's good to see you. We've got Catherine from New Zealand and Tracy in Australia. Thank you very much for joining us. That's awesome. Ruth from Florida and Marie from Boston. So fantastic. All right. So let's do a little bit of New York background. Notoriously difficult place to research. I want to start by introducing, if you don't already know about it, one of the must-have resources for New York research. If you have New York research, you absolutely have to get a copy of this book. I just call it the Big Book, New York Family History Research Guide and Gazetteer. It is published by the New York GNB, so I'm making a pitch for Josh's organization. But as you can see, mine is well loved. I have post-it notes and tabs all over the place. It's got a fantastic section on religious records, actually. It's got, there's a digital version available, right? You can download the digital version.
Correct, there's a PDF version available.
Yep. It is an incredible place to start. So when I'm researching on my New York family, this is just living on my desk all the time. Josh, talk to us a little bit about what makes New York research so tricky.
Well, I think one of the tricky things is, right, New York is it went from colony to state, and there's so much development and so much migration, with also a lack of centralized records. Right. So there, the United States as a whole still doesn't have that civil registration system. And New York State, there are varying time periods in which vital events were recorded. But overall, it wasn't until the sort of, late 1800s and even early 1900s that you get mass compliance with laws and regulations to record vital events. And so, you might read that, oh, this particular city started recording vital records in 1885, or there's some in 1840, but they're not going to be complete. You're still going to have to do some digging. And there's a lot of work that you have to do to sort of track down where the records are. So you have some decentralized records, you have a constant sort of development of land and of resources, and you also have an incredibly mobile population.
Yeah.
From New York, when we ask people what their New York story is, sometimes it's, well, my family came through Ellis Island, they were in New York for 2 years, and then they went west to Nebraska. That's a very different research strategy than someone's family who was in New York in the New Netherland period in the early 1600s, migrated up to Dutchess County, then moved across to Warren County or somewhere else throughout the state of New York, ended up in Buffalo, and then headed to Michigan. So it's a very mobile state in that sense, and it requires a very focused research strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So the time period is crucially important, I think, in developing a research strategy on New York. There's a lot of religious records in particular that have never been digitized and probably won't for the foreseeable future, right? A variety of collections kind of across the state. One of my favorites is the Cornell University Religious Collection for Western New York. And I'll actually share a link to that in the Facebook comments. I need to get to Cornell to actually do the research, but I know there's records there of interest for me. It's high on my list. Josh, what are some of your picks for religious records?
So the NYG&B has something called the Volsberg Collection. And the Volsberg Collection is essentially a wide range of religious records, pretty much from up and down the Hudson River Valley and areas in and around New York City and sort of New York County and that. But really, it's a compilation of records that were at different churches and different religious organizations. I find myself very oftentimes, I'm researching a specific denomination in a specific town, and one of my first calls is to the existing church or the existing religious institution in there to ask where their records are. And usually I'm sent sometimes to a university or sort of somewhere else. But I start with the Volsberg Collection just to ensure that I've covered my bases, because if it's already been abstracted or already been published, I want to start there. Sometimes getting down to the original might be a little more tricky for me and take some additional steps.
Yeah, I did share the link to your website for the Volsberg Collection up in the thread for the video as well, so that's available to everybody. The Volsberg Collection was primarily created by just one individual, but you find a variety of different types and styles of records throughout the collection. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Right. So the actual goal of a lot of the work of Volsberg as they were putting together that collection, he actually wrote and sent forms to religious organizations throughout New York and asked them about the state of their records, if they would be asked to share parts of them. And those forms, actually, some of them are digitized and they're available through the NYG&B. And sometimes the only way you know about a church record that exists somewhere or a particular institution's records that have survived is because of that form. And what always amazes me as I read those forms is that, this was in the 1920s, 1930s. There are churches who have records that are in horrible condition at that period of time.
Already.
I mean, right in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And here I am 100 years later now trying to go back and get those records. So it's a survey of churches, in addition to, the actual records that Volsberg was able to abstract and transcribe, and we sort of have a lot of those transcriptions and that are available. And so really Volsberg is a starting point in that sense. But of course, he didn't do every religious institution. Right. Not everyone responded. And there's 100 years between some of his work and when we're looking for them today.
Right. So were there major denominations that were that we kind of know now looking back that were not included?
Or
was it sporadic?
it very heavily focused on sort of Dutch Reformed, some of the Presbyterian areas. There's fewer records from some of the Catholic churches, and some of the bigger denominations didn't necessarily respond with the, in mass numbers. And also I think some of the sort of offshoot groups, there aren't a lot of materials there. So it does depend sort of denomination to denomination, though.
Gotcha. Okay. So William commented that this looks bigger than an A4 folder. You're right, William. It sure is.
Right. And Jen, you have the first edition there. The revised edition now comes in 2 volumes because it got so big that we had to publish it in 2 volumes. But the second volume is actually a gazetteer, and so it goes down county by county and gives resources and lists of towns. So,
that's how, so actually the gazetteer portion is how I found one of the towns from my ancestral oral history, right? They mentioned this kind of far off town that I couldn't find on a map. I couldn't find anywhere in any kind of reference. And lo and behold, it's in the gazetteer. So now I've been able to place it in a county and actually find resources to prove that it existed. So yeah, this reference is, like I said, invaluable.
Right. And I like the gazetteer portion for religious records, because sometimes you'll have a particular congregation that's named after a place that no longer exists, or that's named something else, but that place name was picked up as part of the gazetteer. So you can use it and find at least what the county that's in.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So a couple other just kind of standard introduction questions before we start getting into individual people. What other kind of New York resources might be available in terms of figuring out which denomination we should look at? Is there anything in particular that you can think of that you're like, wow, it really helps to look at this to understand their religion?
I mean, it's the normal things, right? Are there names of prominent missionaries or leaders in a religious denomination that's used in the family? Where are they living? Understanding that to be married in a church doesn't mean you're a member of that church for the rest of your life. And it's hard because there are certainly clues, right? If you start to do research and you notice that, there's baptism dates here. Okay, well, which churches did baptism for infants? All right, that limits me to a certain group of individuals. I notice some naming patterns here. Well, that's going to limit me to Dutch Reformed, or perhaps I'm looking at this particular denomination. So there are certain clues and patterns, and we should also remember that if you have a date, a full date, sort of month, day, year before 1850 in New York, that date probably came from either a Bible record or a personal record, or potentially some sort of a religious record, because marriages on that were simply not recorded. And so to have a marriage date from 1830, that date had to come from somewhere. And one of those sources is likely to be a religious record. Of course, not all the time, but that's one potential source to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there's been a handful of questions already about Catholic records. So I'm going to give Josh a chance to take a deep breath because this is definitely Findmypast territory. Findmypast has been digitizing the records of the Archdiocese of New York for the last 18 months, 24 months or so. It's a project that we're incredibly excited to be a part of and really proud of, to be quite honest. So it's a long-term project. A couple of questions around providing a timetable, or how long is it going to be until we get the next update? I know you're anxiously waiting, and I wish that I could tell you that we're scanning as quickly as we can, but everything's shut down. So, our employees' health and safety comes first, and that of the archivists and those that are working on the project. So for the time being, due to coronavirus and the pandemic, all of the operations on the scanning center are unfortunately closed for now. We are scanning directly from the archives at the Archdiocese office, so in Yonkers. So, to protect their safety and the safety of our people, we really just had to kind of shut everything down. However, we have some good news that there will be some new marriage records coming out soon. I can't tell you exactly when, but watch in the next few weeks, maybe within a month, because we've just reached a new year, and every time we get past a new year, we can release 100 years ago. So we'll be releasing marriage records from 1919 relatively quickly in the coming weeks. So watch for that. Make sure you signed up for the Find My Past Friday email so you get that in your inbox as soon as it becomes available. So that will be the next release that we do. Beyond that, and especially in terms of baptism records, I know that's one of the questions that's out there. Baptism records take a little bit longer. And the reason for that is because New York is a closed state when it comes to adoption. Is that still accurate to say? Actually, you guys changed your laws, didn't you?
Right. So it's technically adoptees can apply to get a version of the birth certificate.
Okay. I actually don't think I've said that out loud since that change happened.
That was new as of last year.
Right. So, but when it comes to adoption records going out to the public, it is a closed state. What that means is that the Archdiocese has decided to protect their individual citizens and also to comply with state law. They are also going to close adoption records, which means that they have people looking at every single baptismal record and register to make sure there's no adoptions on that page. If there is an adoption, we have to redact it. If there isn't, they give us the all clear and we publish when we get enough kind of in mass to do a decent update. But that process, obviously, that redaction process takes a lot of time. It's just a lot of man hours of someone literally looking at an image of a register of, page by page by page. And it might seem a little over the top to some, but we are doing our best to be compliant with New York State. And that's our goal as a digitization partner. And it's also the goal of the Archdiocese. So when it comes to a timetable on these records, we can't really offer one. And actually the pandemic is the exact reason why, right? The exact example. You never know what's going to happen, right? A camera could break, systems could fail, the world could go into this kind of mass chaos, and our lives could change overnight. So we don't really offer a timetable. Brian asked that question specifically, and I'm sorry that I can't do that, but we don't want to make promises that we can't keep, and reasons like this is exactly why we can't make those promises. So we will do updates as much as we are able and as quickly as we are able. But even keep in mind that the companies we work with to index the records, to actually create the index, they are also shut down. So we really can't move forward on this project at the moment, unfortunately. So that's kind of the update on the New York Archdiocese records. Now, Elaine asked about whether or not anybody's talking to the Diocese of Syracuse for their records. I don't believe that GMB is doing any of that. From our perspective at Findmypast, we have contacted every diocese in the state of New York and beyond, and we would love to work with them. But again, we kind of now are in this waiting and holding pattern. But it's always up to them. These are private archives. There's no law saying they have to digitize their records or share them publicly. So it's up to each diocese individually to make those decisions for themselves as to whether or not they're going to digitize or work with a partner like Findmypast, or if they're going to make them available online ever. It's completely an independent decision within each individual diocese. So hopefully that answers questions about Catholic records. Any additional comments, Josh?
Well, I would just say I think that the New York Archdiocese project has actually changed a lot of New York research. I've been working on projects for people who suddenly are Catholic. I never thought they were Catholic. Or I have people that because we do paid research at the GMB,
Sure.
and we have people that come to us, and the number of times that I've been able to go in, or our research team has been able to go in and find a record. Because again, for some, it's important to baptize their children in the Catholic Church, and they might have, they had no idea that there was that connection there. And so, I am as anxious as everyone else is to get some of those images.
I know,
for the
me
collection.
too.
but I'm also extremely grateful that the project is happening, and I think it's as more records become available, particularly in the New York City area for the Catholic records, it changes the accessibility. It's a great substitute when you're missing other types of vital records.
Right. And keep in mind too that the records that are available online as of today all came from a microfilm collection, actually, because it's much faster to scan that. What we're doing now is actually scanning all of the original registers. So even if you think your parish should be online and you can't find the right page or the right year, it's because it was never microfilmed. So it's all kind of in process and coming. And we did start to do kind of a sweep of picking up registers. We kind of started close to Yonkers at first just to test and make sure our process was good. And then we kind of realized that New York winters are a little bit difficult. So we started working Manhattan area churches closer to summer months and then closer to Yonkers in the winter. So our drivers didn't have to go back and forth and it wasn't quite as much hazard on the road and all that kind of stuff. So the game plan is to kind of get back going as soon as we possibly can, but there's a lot of factors involved.
And I think it's actually an important point, Jen, to bring up, is that factors like that apply to religious records all over New York. You know,
Absolutely.
these are, when these are original collections,
yeah,
you never know what you're getting yourselves into. I was looking through some materials that the NYGNB had digitized. That was a particular religious record. They'd been digitized 12 years ago. And we're sort of still working to process and get them online. But
yeah.
you're dealing with originals where, you know, there's no way to say that this book covers 1782 to 1830 because it covers different blotches and they use different pages, and they're complicated because they are original records.
Yeah.
And so we have to be patient about that, which is another reason why it's difficult to put a timeline on things like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you never know when you're going to find that the church secretary decided to run off with a couple of years of books, or she took them home and then it never came back to the church. And like, you know, those kind of stories kind of go around, but in many cases they're actually true, which is always amusing to me. I struggle with the loss of records, obviously, but I don't know, those stories are great. Okay, I'm rambling now, but let me give you a couple of resources on Catholicism, specifically to New York. If you're interested in Catholicism, there are two books I recommend besides the Gazetteer. The first is A Popular History of the Archdiocese of New York. And I'll put all these in the chat, these titles. And then the second is The Archdiocese of New York, the Bicentennial History. This is really the big one, but you can usually find it like at used bookstores and things, relatively inexpensive. And this is the one that the archivist recommends as well, up at the Archdiocese. All right, Catholic. I think that covers Catholic. We do have one other question about Catholic Catholicism, but I'm going to hold on to that one, and we'll come back to it in a little bit. So Linda wants to know, why is New York City so difficult to navigate? Is there any particular difference between, referring to religious records, in the city versus the rest of the state?
You know, I think for the city, it is the sheer density of the population and the fact that you have multiple parishes, multiple denominations within a very small area to choose from. And it's, you know, that combined with the fact that there are not as many New York City sort of religious records digitized and online as there are for other places, because there are so many of them. I mean, you know, the NYGNB, we still get calls from organizations in Manhattan that says, hey, we have these records that come from the 1830s and 1840s, and we don't know what to do with them. And, you know, you would think that after 150 years, we'd be right. That wouldn't happen anymore.
Right.
But it happens more and more and more. And as technology advances, I mean, it used to be a very different experience to microfilm or digitize your records. Now, more and more denominations are open to it. There's other ways of doing it, but it really is its sheer volume that adds to that complexity. And if you are not on site and also have someone experienced in that specific borough or neighborhood, I mean, I am not a New York City expert researcher. I can get myself in trouble real fast. where I know that, you know, I'm in a neighborhood in a time period that I'm not as familiar with as I should be. But there are people out there that are an absolute expert. One of the real tools that the NYGNB has is part of a knowledge base of online articles that actually breaks down specific denominations and specific areas over time periods. It's not complete, it's not every time period, but it is a significant resource to, you know, take the time and read through the article and begin to pattern and figure out, okay, this person lived here. This were their cross streets. Here's the 3 parishes. This is when they were in existence. And then also never make the assumption that you're going to find those records online. You know, a New York City religious records online collection is never going to be complete, and is one place to look, but you should start actually by contacting that church or figuring out what church is there, and then seeing where their records are, because it's, you know, more often than not, you won't find them digitized or preserved elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think your resource library is actually one of the greatest assets, at least for me, right? I have been watching your recent webinar series. There was a webinar on Jewish genealogy. There was one about the Hudson Valley ethnic groups and religions that was really interesting. So all of those are available, and if I remember right, available behind the membership wall, right? Those are available to members.
Most are, yeah. Where the speaker has been able to give us permission, we'll put them as part of the on-demand member library.
Right, and there is one too on, we had a question about tracing Irish in particular from the city back into Ireland. So check out, and I was going to try and scroll through and see if I could remember who made that comment. The webinar was Irish Church Records, Church of Ireland, Presbyterian and Catholic. And it's a little bit deeper in the webinar series on the GMB's website, but it's an incredibly helpful webinar. I think it was David Rencher that did that one. So very knowledgeable. So definitely check out, for those of you looking for your Irish family, absolutely take a look at those webinar series because they're fantastic. All right, so Deborah talks about her many Dutch origin lines. I hope you're ready to talk Dutch. So would love to know more about the Dutch Reformed Church records. Thanks and hi from Surrey, England.
So Dutch Reformed Church records, by and large, very good and very good coverage within the Volsberg Collection. You'll find a lot within Volsberg. You'll also find a lot abstracted in articles in the record. So the record used to cover series of Dutch Reformed Church records. The NYGNB also published sort of the records of Dutch Reformed Church in New York, and that's available as part of the online records platform. As far as outside of New York City and in other areas, there's a publishing company called Kinship Books. And Kinship Books, run by Arthur and Nancy Kelly until they retired from the business last year, they would travel. They spent 40 years traveling to various churches and communities up and down the Hudson River Valley and writing letters. And one of the main religious organizations that they received records from were Dutch Reformed churches. And so they would publish those transcriptions and then sell them as publications. They actually donated the assets of Kinship Books to the NYGNB last year. And so we have those papers, we have those materials. We're working on including them in the online collection. But if you go to kinshipny.org, you can search by the name and then Dutch Reformed and actually find and see if they've included that a particular church within their publications. So it's another resource to look for, not only Dutch Reformed, but for other denominations. But Dutch Reformed churches, by and large, the records are good, the records exist, and the records are more likely to have already been transcribed or abstracted, either in the record or published.
Right. Okay. So I was gonna say the same thing. It's another good reason to read the record because it's full of Dutch Reformed articles.
Right. And especially early on. In the early sort of 10, 20, 30 years, even 40 years of the record, you'll find a lot of Dutch Reformed materials there.
Excellent. Great. All right. Scrolling through, we've got a couple other denominations to talk about here. So Tess once says, I've been lucky to find a fair amount of information about my Quaker ancestors in Virginia from the late 1600s and 1700s. However, most of the members in my line were disowned by the mid 1700s for marrying outside the faith and so on, which was pretty common. I guess I'm just looking for a little context if you have it. Why would so many people leave the faith around the same time? Was it particularly strict? Were people attracted to a different faith instead, etc.? So I can give a general answer on that. I mean, the 1700s in the Quaker faith, yes, it was very strict. It was very, very strict religion and continues to be so in many ways. And yes, they were disowned if they married outside the church. Remember your time period, you're talking about an area of our country's history where population is increasing exponentially. There's more opportunity to marry outside of the faith. You're also talking about a time of great political unrest. The 1700s, we're starting to get into the Revolutionary War. Often people would leave the Quaker church in order to participate in the war because they were not allowed to carry arms. But all of that being said, Quaker records are excellent religious records. And they talk about all sorts of people, and not just if your family were members of the Quaker church, but also people who are in the community. And there's fantastic collections kind of on a variety of sites. Findmypast has the Irish Quaker records, for example. To my knowledge, New York Quaker records are not digitized and available online anywhere.
They're on a couple of sites.
They're on a couple of
Por- por-
sites.
parts of them
Portions
are.
of
Yes,
them.
portions of
Okay,
them
yeah.
are. Yeah.
But the vast majority, as far as I'm aware, is housed at the Strathmore archives just outside
Swarthmore.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
Swarthmore.
Swarthmore.
Yes,
Yeah.
outside of Philly.
Yeah.
But yeah, Quaker's a fascinating religion to study. Josh, you have commentary on her question?
Well, I mean, I would just say also remember the big sort of schism in the Quaker faith in
Yeah, of
the
course.
1820s, right? Which sort of splits your Hicksite and your Orthodox communities. And there's
Mhm.
actually in New York, there's a New York Quaker census of 1828
That's right.
that helps you to sort that out. That Kinship Books actually publishes. I have a lot of Quaker ancestors in New York, so I actually love my Quaker families because the marriages, they list everyone who attended the wedding, and you get connections and cousins and all sorts of things. But I certainly have a number of families in the mid 1700s that were disowned or married outside the faith. And there's lots of different reasons, like Jen just said, but as we also think about the expansions, people were moving from place to place. Ideas were shifting and they were changing. And I have families that sort of were disowned in the mid 1700s whose grandchildren came back into the Quaker faith in the 1800s and remained members of the Society of Friends until 1920, sort of 1930 period. My great grandfather still spoke in thee and thou and used a lot of the Quaker phrases. My grandmother remembered that as a kid, and letters I have from him, he still uses the language.
Really?
So
Wow.
it's as so many religions are, it was a lifestyle. So, I mean, there's actually another clue as you're looking in writing styles. I mean, now I would read his letters and go, definitely a member of this. That's a friend. That's a friend, just based upon his language. But things like that stick.
Yeah, for sure. All right, one more denomination to cover really quick. Oh, it just disappeared. Hang on. It was about German Lutheran, and I was trying to, and it's a very generic question, actually. What about German church records? So not German specifically, I guess, or German Lutheran specifically, but German church records across New York.
So records, so again, they exist. Sometimes are the most detailed. Actually, the NYGNB has a couple of sort of German Lutheran and other sort of Germanic churches on both online as well as in-house in our offices that we're working to digitize. I will say there are some of the most detailed records. They very oftentimes, for immigrants, list a place of origin in Germany. The NYGNB offers a research trip to New York City every year, and it was in February, and we had someone who used some of the records we had in our offices who found the exact town of origin in Germany that her family was from in those records. So
that's awesome.
They're oftentimes very detailed.
Fantastic. All right, I want to we just have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one more really specific question about New York, and then we'll go to kind of the second part of the conversation, which is more along the lines of how does it help you get back to the UK and the differences there. So the question was posted earlier today. This individual has relatives that were on Blackwell Island from around 1890 to 1910, and they think they were Catholic. Would any records be available? So Blackwell Island is now Roosevelt Island, right?
Right.
And what was Roosevelt Island? What was Blackwell Island?
Well, you've got, I mean, there's a hospital there, there's an institution there. I would, at that time period, you'd want to look, I can't think of a specific church that would have been there, but you'd want to see what churches are in the area. I guess what Catholic churches are close.
Yeah, I did, because we got the question in advance, I did do a little digging, and it is part of the Archdiocese of New York.
Okay.
But the first church that was built there, it looks like was in 1909. So if there's no specific church on Blackwell Island, I would say the strategy would be to look nearby, as Josh just suggested, and see which Catholic church was already in existence, would have been open and available at that time when your ancestors were there, and actually go, just do common sense, right? Which church was closest, which church was giving mass in the same language, if they were German or Swedish or what have you. Look for those kind of signs and start as near to the island as you can and expand your search from there.
And this is where the New York City directories are absolutely key for this. The New York Public Library has a bunch that are online completely for free. There's no charge. Look for the organization, look for the religious institutions, and see what's close. And if you if you need to eliminate some churches, start, make your list and start there. It's one thing that I love. The first thing I ever learned about doing research in the UK, to sort of bridge to the UK, is you find where the wife is from by putting a dot where they're married and doing a 5-mile circle around it and check every single parish, and you expand that circle as time moves along. Same strategy appears in this case for the Blackwell's Island question.
That's a great segue. Thanks for doing that without knowing it. So Findmypast has actually built a tool for our British records that allows you to do that search by mile radius automatically. So it ignores all the parish boundaries and county lines, and it just says 5 miles from this point, 10, 15, out to 100 miles, which when you think about it is about half the island of Britain. So it allows you to expand that search just as Josh just described. So that was fantastic. So Josh started this conversation by telling us that US records, we know religious records across the US are not standardized. In the UK, it's a very different world. If you had to give someone who is brand new to the UK research, Josh, a piece of advice, what would be your first thing that you would tell them about research in the UK?
Thank goodness for civil registration.
Yeah.
No, it's really, I mean, it's between the census, civil registration, but back to the 1830s, and then a consistent sort of statewide religion, the Anglican records, they're absolutely, it's a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
So that'd be sort of the first advice. Then, of course, they're going to come back and say, well, that works for your family, but not for mine. I can't find my family.
Yeah.
And this is where, the grouping of non-conformists, the grouping of those records together as a collection is a completely different way of approaching research. Because suddenly I have a collection I can start at with all these different denominations that are not Anglican that I can start to go through and look at specific records. And I have families that immigrated from England into the US through New York in the 1850s and 1860s, and they were nonconformists from about 1770 up until the point that they left. And they weren't consistent nonconformists in the sense that they were Baptist, then Methodist again, then back and forth. And no one told me that when I started researching.
Well, that would be too easy.
but it is actually incredible to me that I can, my Taylor namesake, my Taylor immigrant to the country, he has 3 different baptismal records.
Wow.
Because technically his baptism was recorded in 3 different denominations. And no one explained to me how that can occur, right? And one of them was Anglican, right? So he was in the Anglican, then he was in 2 of the nonconformist sort of records. Right. But that type of research it's different, and it's also very complete. But it does require a different strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you keep in mind too that if they were nonconformists and they were coming to the New World in a certain period, they had no real reason to write down where they were coming from. This is actually a point that you and I have talked about before in the past. And even when I took your SLIG course, I think you reinforced this with me, drill this through your head, Jen, that they in many cases didn't have a reason to write down anything about the world they left. And in many cases, they were putting themselves at risk if they did so, right? Because they were admitting to being a part of this religion that was at the time illegal in England.
Right. I mean, you study origins by studying communities, right? I mean, where does the English immigrant in the 1830s, where do they go when they get to New York? Right. If they move into whatever different neighborhood, that's an indicator. That's a question. Look for naming patterns. Look for who they're living around. When I'm using religious records in the US and I'm looking at sponsors, right? If someone has a child born a year after they've arrived, I want to know who the sponsors are, and I want to know how they would have known that person. Right? Is that a new friend? Is that someone that my family knew? Who did they marry? Yeah. I mean, think about the risk of a set of parents who were working through mates for their children. They're going to choose usually people that they are familiar with, or that they knew back home, or that are cousins or friends of so and so. Right. Yeah, that's actually how I found some of my Irish family in the Catholic records. The 2 individuals come over, they're two men, they come over on the boat together, they settle outside of Pittsburgh.
And then I realized that one is a witness to the other one's marriage. And so then I start going back onto that tree and researching through the religious records and actually find out that they are brother-in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the story goes through Wales, actually, because I find them in the census, and he's living with the family before he married the daughter in Wales, and then back to the step in Ireland. So yeah, always important to research those witnesses and other members of the fan club.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to take a second to scroll through the picture or through the comments again. I almost said pictures, because that's what you do. You scroll through pictures, right? All right. What other comments do we have in terms of UK versus US, almost from a religious standpoint? Is there anything else that you feel like in your research or your stories, your experiences has really stood out to you that was a really light bulb moment?
I will say the patterns of first names of immigrants are really key, and that's a loaded statement, because it's not a guarantee. But
Yeah.
when you look at an immigrant family, there's sometimes two potential pathways. One is you'll actually see a family, because they're in the new world or new place, they'll start to use brand new names that they've never used before.
But this isn't my name got changed to Ellis Island thing.
Right. No, because that didn't happen.
Right.
It's that they'll start to, where they would always name their kids John, Mary, and William. Suddenly they're going to name a child Benjamin or Caleb, right? They're going to incorporate new names. And so sometimes that's an indicator you get in a family that's immigrated into the US. The other thing you get is almost an opposite side of that, where they will continue through with their pattern of naming. Right. I mean, trying to identify a family in overseas UK records versus records in the US, if a family has two children that are both christened with the first name of James, and I can't find a burial for the one, might not be the same family. Right. I've got to make a definitive case for why that family has two children named James living at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that was one of the light bulb moments for me in researching in religious records, is that get that entire family and start to look for those patterns. Do they break the pattern where the first child is named after this person, the second child after that person? And sometimes, I mean, in my family, I had someone that named their first child born in the US after the name of the person that led the wagon train that took them from the Midwest out to California. Yeah. And that was who they named their child for. I'm sure there's a story there. Yeah. But those names are incredibly important.
And I also have found, for me, one of my light bulb moments, not necessarily New York, but just religious records in general, was that they didn't necessarily refer to themselves the same way that we do, right? I have a newspaper clipping that says, that talks about my Moravian ancestors arriving in New York, or sorry, not New York, in Canada. And the newspaper clipping actually says, we asked this group of Moravians about such and such, and they said, we're not Moravians, we're not from Moravia. And so they had never labeled themselves as Moravians, right, as we would today, and they never did over the course of their history, right? It was just a different denomination.
Right, and the outside perspectives of how you're, unfortunately, so often you're as a group, you're defined by those who define you, not by how you define yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's it does happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and the modern context over historical context and all of those aspects. Lori Ann says she has all nonconformist ancestors from England. She loves those collections. So yeah, that's fun research to do for sure. Okay, so we had a question way back, and I think it's a good time for it. This is where the commercial pitch starts to come in a little bit. I was trying to find who asked it. They said last year, Nancy, last year I got a discount on a Findmypast subscription because I was an NYGMB member. I've let my subscription to NYGMB lapse. If I renew, do I get a discount code to renew my Findmypast subscription? All right,
so the answer is yes, actually. It's a great answer. So a membership in the NYGMB gives you a version of the domestic Findmypast subscription, which includes Catholic records.
That's right.
So it includes access to those New York records, and you also get a discount code to upgrade to a fuller package of Findmypast.
Yeah, which it would include everything on the site.
Which gives you everything. So it's actually a, the answer is you get a sort of domestic based modified subscription to FMP, but then you also get that discount code to upgrade that subscription to a sort of all access FMP subscription.
And one of the great things about that offer through the GMB is that you get access to more than just religious records, obviously, but when you upgrade to that full package, you get access to the international newspapers, the British and Irish newspapers that we're digitizing through the British Library. So do you have any commentary on researching religions through newspapers?
I've done a little bit in terms of notices of meetings, trying to track down specific ministers. I've had some finds of nonconformists who weren't particularly liked by the editors of a specific newspaper. I have a couple of ancestors who are members of the early Mormon or LDS church, and I know when the LDS missionaries were in town in England, based upon the newspapers,
right?
Sort of some unkind things said. And I also happen to know who was giving them shelter and who was supporting them, because that was reported in the newspaper. So a lot of that sort of social context you can get through newspapers.
Yeah, fantastic. And I already gave my best newspaper story, so I'd give it away. But
it's a good story, though.
It's a good story. All right, so let's just scroll through. We have all sorts of comments, people contributing about burial records, the All-Faith Cemetery. Judith says, my ancestors lived in Manhattan, but their infant children were buried at All-Faith Cemetery. She doesn't say where that is. I would be curious to know, Judith, a little bit more information to answer this. It's a Lutheran burial. Any idea which church I might look for further information? I think, unless you know off the top of your head, where All-Faith is.
Yeah, there's probably something in the knowledge base that would tell you exactly where that is. Also, cemeteries in New York City and in Manhattan and Queens and that, they oftentimes have records, but they're very difficult to contact. And their offices are usually their records are very old and not necessarily in a digital format where they can access them right away. So but they are great records in a lot of cases when they can be found.
When they can be found, yeah. Deborah says, in using church records, I found it really useful to browse through the pages around an entry that I'm specifically interested in, as you can often find other relatives having events recorded. Going back and forth amongst the records, always very, very important to go several pages back and forth.
And also look for patterns. I mean, I've been using this last 8 weeks at home in the evenings to work on some personal projects. And one of the, I've been missing a christening record in the UK for someone for quite a while. And I always have had this sort of feeling in my stomach. I'm like, well, maybe I have the wrong person. And I finally went back and reviewed that entire collection from page 1 all the way through. Mm-hmm. And I realized that there are literally no baptisms entered for the year 1782 and 1783. And that's the year when this person would have been born. But all the other years are there. And so I literally realized, well, I think it's impossible that there's no way there were no children being born in that community, right? Yeah. I have his marriage, I know that, but it's a reasoning. And so oftentimes in family history, right, we're looking for the proof. But in that case, that allows me to develop a proof argument of why I would not expect to find that baptismal record, because it's not recorded in that particular set.
Right, negative evidence is very important in your proof argument, just as much as positive. So we've talked a lot about a variety of different angles, and we've got about 6 minutes left. So let's wrap it up with kind of one last main topic. And this is something that I'm guilty of not taking advantage of as much as I should. We know that records across the United States are somewhat sporadic. They're kind of random. They're in private archives. They're kind of all over the place. How do we go about finding these collections, these materials? Josh, can you talk to us a little bit about WPA surveys?
Right. I was just going to say you're talking about WPA records. So these are, I wish that one of the first things that I had learned was the WPA surveys that exist in different places. Now this is not a magic wand for everywhere, but in New York they're extremely helpful. There's some of them on the NYGMB's website. There's some of them at the New York State Archives. But in the sort of 1930s and in the 1940s, the WPA basically went through and inventoried collections. And so they would go through denomination by denomination, identify where the records are, and give a description of their holdings. And so in New York, sort of their county by county, there's a lot of them online that you can get. They're sort of public domain entries for different states. They're for Massachusetts, for Rhode Island. And they are my number one go-to resource when I'm trying to find a complete list of what records did exist at one period. Now, granted, you've still got to find the records in 2020. So you've only got a clue, but knowing where they were and the condition that they were in 1934, 1935 is really a great first step towards finding them today. So those WPA surveys are actually one of the first things that I look at when I'm approaching an area and looking for religious records. Even before, in some cases, if I don't know the denomination yet, I still will go and get a list of all the different denominations that were identified in that survey, because it gives me a place to start, right? If you don't know what denomination, pick one and start, right? The worst thing that will happen, right? The worst thing that will happen is you won't find it there and we'll move to the next one.
Right.
And the WPA series are great for that.
Yeah, and hopefully will lead to members of the faith as well, in terms of ministers and other people actually serving the church, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. That's what I need to do. This should be the top of my to-do list, to look for my Welsh minister who's floating around Western New York somewhere.
Right. You know, and I've actually started. You never start the way you should in these situations. And I've started going through a lot of my New York families and saying, you know, I never looked at religious records for that family because I had a Bible that gave me some dates, but that was that. Hey, but I had a Bible, which meant something. So then I'll, then I'll go back through and start looking. And in a lot of cases, I'm emailing different denominations. I mean, I found incredible luck through Facebook lately, contacting a church and getting a volunteer at that church that says, I have no idea, but let me ask.
Right.
And, and it's great, the things that they can uncover. And sometimes, even if the church doesn't exist anymore, right? I did this in Connecticut about a year ago. And I contacted a volunteer via Facebook, and they said, well, let me find out. And they gave me the history of the 4 different churches with that same denomination in that town, and that the records, as far as they knew, had gone there for that church and there. It was just,
wow.
It's talking to people on the ground. It just goes to show that while online research is great and is absolutely needed, there is a pairing that we need that sort of boots on the ground connection with people that know the stuff.
Absolutely. And if you can't find the church, or if it's ceased to exist, contact the local genealogical society or the historical society. Someone in that neighborhood knows what happened to that church, that group of people, that organization. So
and also lately, oral history interviews for people living in a community that remember different churches. Use the keyword church or religion, and see if they remember specific churches in an area. It's all these universities that have oral histories projects.
Right, absolutely.
Right, as they're interviewing older residents of a community, everybody talks about a church. Everybody talks about something. So there's all sorts of different ideas out there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good suggestion. All right. So we did get a response from our burial records question. But I've lost it again. There's just so many wonderful comments to read through. So thank you all very much for doing that. Judith responded on her Lutheran church. I have the burial plots and details obtained from all faiths, but thought the church may lead me to the parents who disappear after their deaths. Unfortunately, they have the common Welsh surname of Jones. Yeah, Judith, I feel your pain. My Welsh family is Evans. I totally get that. Yeah, it's tough.
And we should be honest. Burial records within a church register are oftentimes, they're not going to necessarily list a parent's names. If someone dies at the age of sort of 50, 60, they might have their name, and then you might not even get an age. You might just get a date of death.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're about to the end of our hour. Any last parting comments or thoughts from you, Josh?
Well, I want to thank Findmypast for doing this. This has been a fun discussion. It's always fun to look at and discuss family history and genealogy and talk about the NYGNB. I think our offices, of course, have all gone remote, and I miss people.
Yeah,
computer screens are okay. But I also am just constantly reminded by how much of New York I don't know yet in this period when I'm reaching out to people, and how much I rely upon colleagues and others that have been there before. And I think my closing words would be, don't forget about the people. that can
Yeah.
help you through this, particularly when it comes to religious records, because someone in that community might very well know about a church or a minister or something that can unlock the record that you're looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really, really well said. I think you're right. I miss people too. And we're getting some comments. Deborah says, great session. Thank you very much. Judith said it was fascinating. I'm glad to hear that. So thank you all for being with us and being a part of our community and talking with us. Remember that you can carry the conversation on here on Facebook or on the Find My Past forum in our community-led group. It's designed just for conversations like that. So do as Josh says, and reach out to the people. You never know what you're going to learn. Josh, thank you so much for being with us today. This was fun, and it was great to have you on as our first guest on Let's Discuss. So thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, we are going to close it down. Next week, though, I will tell you what's happening. We have a good one for all of those people out there who have been asking about immigration. And passenger lists and all of those types of topics. We've had a lot of questions in the series related to immigration. Next week, we're bringing in Jackie Schuck, who is the director at the American Family Immigration did I say that right? Yeah, director at the American Family Immigration History Center on Ellis Island. She is energetic and passionate about what she does. She's a wonderful representative of Ellis Island and everything that it stands for. So join us next week, same time on our Facebook page, 4 o'clock Eastern, to join our conversation with Jackie. It should be a really, really fun one. So have your questions ready and be ready for next week. Also, don't forget, we have a couple other live sessions on the Find My Past page for the rest of the week. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but we definitely have Find My Past Fridays with Alex on Friday. So we'll release some new records, and it's a really good record week. So you want to make sure you tune in for Alex this Friday. I'm just going to tease you all with that. All right. Thank you all very much. We're going to close out for the week, and be safe. Take care of each other. Okay.